There is a quiet kind of tension that settles over a poker table. Not the kind that comes from big bluffs or dramatic reveals, but the slow, steady pressure of uncertainty. Every card that falls changes what is possible. Every chip moved across the felt is shaped by numbers that most players never see, but always feel. Tonight, we turn our attention to the math and odds that guide every decision in poker. These are the quiet rules beneath the surface, shaping hands from the first deal to the final river. The focus remains on the most practical odds and calculations. Those that matter most from day one, across every table and every hand. From the basics of counting outs and understanding pot odds, through the subtle shifts of equity in multi-way pots, and the patient confidence that comes with intuition. The ground we cover belongs to the real world of cards and chips. The dominant force here is uncertainty. It is the weight between cards, the silence before a call, the limits of what can be known, and what must be guessed. As we settle in, let the pace ease. There is no rush here, and nothing sudden will disturb the flow. The numbers and ideas will arrive gently, one at a time. For now, it is enough to stay with the rhythm of the table and let the math unfold at its own quiet pace. Chapter 1. The most common poker odds and math you will use first. The number and type of cards that can improve your hand directly shape which decisions are worth considering. In poker, these cards are called outs. Outs are any unseen cards that will upgrade your current holding to a hand you are aiming for on a future street. To count outs correctly, you first need to lay out all the cards you know, your own 2 whole cards, the 3 community cards on the flop, and any cards you have seen folded face up. In a standard deck, there are 52 cards in total. After the flop in Texas Hold'em, you know your 2 cards and the 3 on the board, which leaves 47 unseen cards. Finding your outs begins with imagining what cards will turn your holding into a likely winner. If you have 4 cards to a flush after the flop, you are looking for 1 more card of that suit. There are 13 cards of each suit in the deck, and you already see 2 in your hand and 2 on the board, so there are 9 cards of that suit left. These 9 cards are your outs for a flush draw. For a straight draw, if you have a hand like 6 and 7, with a flop of 8, 9 and king, you need either a 5 or a 10 to complete a straight. There are 4 5s and 4 10s in the deck, so you have 8 outs for an open-ended straight draw. Each of these scenarios shows how counting outs is about listing specific ranks and suits that would make your hand strong. Blockers are cards that you hold or that are visible on the board, and they matter because they remove potential outs from the deck. If you are drawing to a flush, and one of your opponents is also likely to have a card of that suit, the true number of outs might be lower than 9. Sometimes you might see a card that would give you a good hand, but would also make a better hand for your opponent. For example, if you are drawing to a straight but that straight would also complete a flush for your opponent, that card is not a true out for you. Counting such cards as outs is a mistake, because they could cost you the pot even if you hit. A common beginner error is double counting outs, such as counting a card that makes both a straight and a flush as 2 separate outs when it is really only 1 card. Another mistake is including cards that could give your opponent a stronger hand, such as counting an out that gives you a straight but completes a flush for your opponent. To avoid this, always check if any of your outs can also help your opponent, and adjust your count accordingly. The correct method is to start with all remaining cards of each rank or suit that would help you, subtract the ones that are visible or that you know are in play, and then remove any that could create a better hand for your opponent. The math of counting outs is grounded in the composition of the deck. After the flop, you always have 47 unseen cards. If you are on the turn, you have seen 1 more card, so there are 46 cards left. Understanding this count is fundamental for all the calculations that follow. When you have finished counting your outs, you have a clear sense of what you need to improve. For example, with 9 outs for a flush draw, your chance of hitting on the next card, the turn, is about 19.15%. With 8 outs for an open-ended straight draw, your chance of hitting on the turn is about 17.02%. If you have only 4 outs, such as for a gut shot straight draw, your chance is much lower. These percentages give you a first measure of how likely your hand is to improve with 1 card to come. The next step is to convert your outs into odds against improving, which helps you decide if calling a bet is worthwhile. The most practical way to do this at the table is the rule of 4 and 2. With 2 cards to come, such as after the flop, you multiply your outs by 4 to estimate the chance of improving by the river. With 1 card to come, such as after the turn, you multiply your outs by 2 to estimate the chance of improving on the river. To see how this works, imagine you have a 9-out flush draw on the flop. Multiply 9 by 4, and you get 36. This tells you that your chance of making the flush by the river is about 36%. The exact probability is slightly lower, at about 34.97%, but the rule of 4 is close enough for most practical decisions. On the turn, with 1 card to come and 9 outs, the rule of 2 gives you about 18% as a quick estimate. The exact chance is 9 divided by 46, which is about 19.6%. For an open-ended straight draw with 8 outs, multiply 8 by 4 for 32% by the river. The exact value is about 31.45%. On the turn, multiply 8 by 2 for 16%, with the exact value being 8 divided by 46, or about 17.4%. For a gut shot straight draw with 4 outs, 4 times 4 is 16% by the river, with the exact value closer to 16.5%. On the turn, 4 times 2 is 8%, and the exact value is 4 divided by 46, or about 8.7%. The rule of 4 and 2 is quick and easy, but it is not perfect. It becomes less accurate when your outs are not clean, such as when some outs might give your opponent a better hand, or when blockers reduce the true out count. It also becomes less accurate as the number of outs increases. In close decisions, you should rely on the exact math rather than the approximation. The exact formula for hitting an out with 2 cards to come is 1 minus the product of the probabilities of missing on both the turn and the river. For example, with 9 outs and 47 unseen cards, the chance of missing on the turn is 38 out of 47, and the chance of missing again on the river is 37 out of 46. Multiply these together and subtract from 1 to get the chance of hitting at least 1 out by the river. Knowing your odds against hitting a draw helps you weigh them against the price of a bet. If you have 9 outs on the turn with 46 unseen cards, the odds against you are 37 to 9, or about 4 to 1. With 4 outs, the odds against are 42 to 4, which reduces to 21 to 2. With 8 outs, the odds against are 38 to 8, or 19 to 4. For 3 outs, it is 43 to 3. For 15 outs, it is 31 to 15. If you have only 1 out, the odds against are 45 to 1. These ratios help you quickly see if the price you are being offered to call a bet is fair. Pot odds are the ratio between the size of the pot and the size of the bet you must call. They tell you how much you stand to win compared to what you must risk, and they set the minimum equity you need for a call to be break-even, assuming no more betting after this street. To convert pot odds into a break-even percentage, divide the amount you must call by the total pot after your call, and then express the result as a percentage. Consider a scenario where your opponent bets half the pot. If the pot is 100 and your opponent bets 50, the pot becomes 150. You must call 50 to win a final pot of 200. Your pot odds are 150 divided by 50, which is 3 to 1. The break-even equity is 50 divided by 200, or 25%. This means you need at least 25% equity to justify a call. If your opponent bets the size of the pot, you must call 100 to win a final pot of 300. Your pot odds are 3 to 1, and your break-even equity is 100 divided by 300, or 33.33%. If your opponent overbets, betting 200 into a pot of 100, you must call 200 to win a final pot of 500. Your pot odds are 300 divided by 200, which is 1.5 to 1, and your break-even equity is 200 divided by 500, or 40%. Expected value, or EV, is the average result of a decision if you repeated the same spot many times. If your hand's equity is higher than the break-even equity set by the pot odds, your call is profitable in the long run. If it is lower, your call loses money over time. To see this in action, imagine the pot is 200, your opponent bets 100, and you must call 100 to win a final pot of 400. Your pot odds are 3 to 1, and your break-even equity is 100 divided by 400, or 25%. If the chance of your draw completing is 34%, your expected value is positive, because you win more than one time out of 4. When you decide whether to call or fold, think of a decision tree. If you call and hit your draw, you win the pot. If you miss, you lose your call amount. Multiply your chance of winning by the pot size, subtract the chance of losing multiplied by your call amount, and you have your expected value. For example, with a 34% chance to win a pot of 300 by calling 100, your expected value is 34% times 300 minus 66% times 100. That comes out to a positive expected value, meaning the call is profitable. If your equity is less than the break-even percentage from the pot odds, your expected value is negative, and folding is correct. For example, if you are facing a pot-sized bet, your break-even equity is 33.33%. If your hand only has 25% equity, calling will lose you money in the long run. Equity is your share of the pot, expressed as the probability that your hand will win or tie by showdown against an opponent's hand or range. In real games, you rarely know exactly what your opponent has, so you estimate their likely range of hands based on their actions. For practical table use, you can group ranges into types, such as top pair hands, draws, or overcard hands, and compare your hand's strength against these groups. For example, if you hold a pocket pair and your opponent has 2 overcards, your preflop equity is often in the low to mid-50s, varying by the pair rank and the overcards. As the board develops, equity shifts. If the flop brings cards that help your opponent's range, your equity might drop. If the board is low and uncoordinated, your pocket pair may retain most of its value. Another common spot is when suited connectors face high card hands. Before the flop, suited connectors are usually behind, but if the flop brings a flush or straight draw, their equity rises sharply. On a board with 2 cards of their suit, a suited connector with a flush draw gains substantial equity by the river, often approaching parity against high card hands. If the board is dry and misses their draws, their equity falls back to the chance of making a pair or running into a straight. Equity also depends on the number of outs and the street. On the turn, with 9 outs to a flush and 46 unseen cards, your equity is 9 divided by 46, or about 19.5%. With 4 outs, your equity is 4 divided by 46, or about 8.7%. If you are all in on the flop with only 1 out for the turn and river, your equity is found by taking 1 minus the product of missing on both streets, which is about 4.2%. If you are all in on the turn with exactly 2 outs and 46 unseen cards, your chance to hit on the river is 2 divided by 46, which is about 4.35%. Understanding how to count outs, convert them into odds, apply pot odds, and estimate equity builds the mathematical language you need for every hand. These habits give you a clear, calm sense of what is possible, what is probable, and what is profitable. Each calculation brings you a little closer to the heart of the game, where every decision is shaped by the quiet rhythm of numbers beneath the action. Let your mind drift through these patterns, and let the gentle certainty of the math settle in, as the table slows and the cards move softly from one street to the next. Chapter 2: Drawing Hands and Their Real-World Frequencies. Drawing hands change the way you approach decision-making in poker, because they introduce new possibilities for improvement that are not yet realized. When you have a drawing hand, you are not simply weighing your current holding against what is visible. You must also account for the cards that could complete your hand on future streets, and how likely those outcomes really are. This requires a calm, methodical evaluation of your outs and their frequencies, so you can act with confidence and avoid costly mistakes. The following discussion will help you internalize these core drawing situations, giving you the mental shortcuts that experienced players use to navigate them without hesitation. When you pick up 4 cards to a flush on the flop, your decision-making changes instantly. You now have 9 specific cards in the deck that will complete your flush. These 9 outs represent the remaining cards of your suit in the deck, since you hold 2 and the board shows 2 more. Out of the 47 unseen cards after the flop, 9 are good for you. This means that if you see just the next card, the chance of making your flush on the turn is 9 divided by 47. That is just under 20%. If you see both the turn and river, your chances increase, because you get 2 shots at those 9 outs. The exact probability is calculated as 1 minus the probability that neither the turn nor the river is a flush card. This comes out to just under 35%. Knowing these numbers by heart lets you react quickly when the pressure is on. The math changes slightly when you are on the turn with a flush draw. Now there are only 46 unseen cards, but you still have 9 outs. Your chance to make the flush on the river is 9 divided by 46, which is slightly less than 20%. It is important to notice that this number does not double just because you had 2 streets before. Each street is a separate event, and the combined chance is less than the sum of the individual street probabilities. This pattern repeats with all draws, and you will see it again when we discuss straight draws. Sometimes you hold 2 suited cards and see only 3 of your suit on the flop. In these cases, you have what is called a backdoor flush draw. To make a flush, you need both the turn and river to be your suit. The number of outs here is not 9, but instead you have to multiply the chance of hitting your suit on the turn by the chance of hitting one of the remaining cards of that suit on the river. This is a much lower probability, closer to 4%, and is not something you can rely on unless the pot odds are extremely favorable. Backdoor draws add a sliver of hope, but they are not the main reason to continue, unless they come with other possibilities. There are situations where your flush outs are not all clean. If the board is paired, making your flush might lose to a full house or 4 of a kind. If there are higher cards of your suit unaccounted for, an opponent may be drawing to a higher flush. In these cases, not all 9 outs are truly live. You must mentally discount some of them, lowering your effective equity. This adjustment is critical to avoid overvaluing your draw and calling bets that you cannot justify with the true odds. It is easy to fall into the trap of chasing a flush when some of your outs are actually losing cards, so always pause to consider the board and the action so far before you proceed. Many players misjudge the strength of their flush draw especially in multi-way pots or on paired boards. They see the 9 outs and assume that making the flush guarantees a win. However, when the board is paired or the action suggests that another player may have a higher flush draw, your equity drops. By keeping the true math in mind, you prevent yourself from making calls that look tempting but are actually negative expected value. This discipline saves you from the frustration of making your hand only to lose to a bigger one, and it builds a habit of careful calculation that pays off over time. When you are dealt cards that give you a straight draw, the structure of your outs shifts. The most common straight draw is open-ended. This occurs when your cards and the board form 4 consecutive ranks, leaving 8 cards in the deck that will complete your straight. With 8 outs and 47 unseen cards on the flop, your chance to hit the straight on the turn is just over 17%. If you play through both the turn and river, the probability of completing the straight by the river is about 31%. This is calculated in the same way as with flush draws, by subtracting the probability that neither the turn nor river brings one of your outs from one. Gut shot straight draws are less frequent, but still important. A gut shot means you need a specific rank, one internal card, to complete your straight. There are only 4 outs for a gut shot, so the chance of hitting on the turn is just over 8%. With 2 cards to come, the chance rises to about 16.5%. This is much lower than the open-ended draw, and it is crucial to recognize the difference at the table. Gut shots are tempting because they often appear in disguised spots, but the math rarely justifies chasing them, unless the pot is very large or there are additional ways to win. Double gut shot straight draws are a special case where you have 2 different ranks that can complete your straight, each with 4 outs. This gives you 8 outs total, matching the open-ended draw in terms of raw numbers. Double gut shots often go unnoticed, so developing the habit of scanning for them will help you spot hidden opportunities. The equity for a double gut shot is the same as for an open-ended straight draw, so your decisions should follow the same logic. Board texture can dramatically affect your straight draw equity. If the board pairs, some of your outs may no longer be clean, as making your straight could lose to a full house. Card removal is another factor. If you see one of your outs in another player's hand or folded, you must reduce your count accordingly. This attention to detail helps you avoid counting outs that are not truly available, which is a common source of error for players trying to estimate their chances on the fly. The ability to quickly recognize the type of straight draw you have is a skill that grows with practice. Open-ended, gut shot, and double gut shot draws all have distinct characteristics, and knowing the outs for each allows you to act without hesitation. When you can classify a draw instantly, you free up mental energy to focus on other aspects of the hand, such as bet sizing and opponent tendencies. Hands that combine multiple draws offer some of the most powerful equity situations in poker. Combo draws, such as having both a flush draw and a straight draw at the same time, give you more ways to win. When you count the outs for a combo draw, you must be careful not to double count cards that complete both draws. For example, if you have a 4-card flush draw and an open-ended straight draw, and 2 of your outs complete both hands, your total number of outs is 9 plus 8 minus 2, which equals 15. With 15 outs and 47 unseen cards on the flop, your chance to improve on the turn is 15 divided by 47, which is nearly 32%. If you see both the turn and river, the probability of hitting at least 1 out is calculated as 1 minus the probability that neither card brings one of your outs. This comes out to just over 54%. Combo draws often have so much equity that they justify aggressive play, even if you are currently behind to a made hand. The sheer number of ways to improve means you are rarely a significant underdog. The strength of a combo draw is not just in the raw number of outs. but also in how those outs interact. Some outs may give you the absolute best hand, while others may only give you a strong but vulnerable one. For example, making a flush is usually the nut hand, unless the board is paired, while making a straight may still lose to a flush if 3 suited cards are on the board. Being precise with your out counting and equity estimation lets you navigate these spots with clarity. As you encounter combo draws more often, you will develop a sense for when your equity is high enough to continue or even raise. Many combo draws cross the threshold where the math supports aggressive action, rather than just calling. This confidence comes from repeated exposure and accurate calculation. The more often you see these situations, the more automatic your decision-making becomes, and the less likely you are to make mistakes under pressure. When you are dealt a small pocket pair, your thinking before the flop is shaped by the possibility of making 3 of a kind, or a set, on the flop. The odds of flopping a set with any pocket pair are about 11.76%, which is roughly 1 time in 8.5. This is a rare event, and most of the time you will miss. There are exactly 6 combinations of any specific pocket pair in the deck, and the calculation for flopping a set is based on how many flops contain at least one of the 2 remaining cards of your rank, out of all possible flops. The decision to call a raise pre-flop with a small pair hinges on the potential to win a large pot when you do hit a set. This is called set mining, and it is only profitable when the stacks are deep enough to justify the risk. If the effective stack sizes are small, the reward for hitting your set is not worth the times you miss and have to fold. Disciplined players only pursue set mining when the implied value is sufficient, and they avoid becoming emotionally attached to their small pairs. When you miss the flop with a small pair, the correct play is usually to fold, unless the board gives you additional draws, or your opponent shows weakness. Chasing sets without the right conditions leads to long-term losses, as the frequency of hitting is too low to compensate for repeated small losses. The discipline to let go of small pairs when the math does not support continuing is a hallmark of experienced players. The comfort that comes from understanding the real odds of drawing hands allows you to play with a steady hand and a clear mind. You can move through each decision, knowing exactly how often your draws will complete, and you can avoid the traps that snare less prepared players. There is a quiet confidence in knowing the math, a sense of calm that lets you focus on the flow of the game rather than the anxiety of the unknown. As the cards are dealt and the streets unfold, you find your rhythm, thinking ahead with every draw and every out, fully at ease with the numbers behind each possibility. The table slows, your breathing settles, and the patterns of the game become familiar. Each new hand, another chance to practice the art of patient, precise calculation. Chapter 3: Overcards, Top Pair, and Marginal Equity Situations. When your cards are higher than any card showing on the board but have not yet paired, your decision process shifts from evaluating made hand strength to weighing potential. Overcards, unpaired whole cards, ranking above the current board, occupy a unique place in poker. They are not made hands, yet they are not without value. The equity of overcards comes from the possibility of pairing on future streets, and understanding how often this happens is essential for sound strategy. Rather than seeing missed flops as a reason to give up, recognize that 2 overcards can represent a meaningful share of the pot, especially when facing a single opponent with a medium strength holding. Take the scenario where you hold Ace of Hearts and King of Hearts, and the flop comes 2 of clubs, 2 of diamonds, and 7 of hearts. Your opponent holds 7 of clubs and 8 of clubs. You have not paired the board, but both of your cards are higher than the 7s and 2s showing. At this moment, there are 47 unknown cards left in the deck. Of these, 2 remaining aces and 2 remaining kings will give you a pair higher than 7s, turning your hand into the best made hand if your opponent does not improve. Calculating your chance to improve involves considering all possible ways the turn and river can play out. Using only your 4 overcard outs, the probability of making at least one pair by the river is a combination of hitting on the turn, hitting on the river, or hitting both. This is not the same as simply multiplying your outs by 4, as some improvement paths overlap, but the result is that you will find yourself improving to a winning pair a significant portion of the time. Equity, which is your share of the pot over the long run, quantifies this potential. In situations with 2 overcards against a medium pocket pair, your equity is typically in the low to mid 40s%, depending on the exact holdings and board. While it is true that having only overcards means you are not ahead at the moment, it is equally true that you are not drawing dead. The value of your hand persists through the possibility of improvement, and every unpaired overcard gives you clean outs, cards that, if they arrive, will likely make you the winner, unless the board or your opponent's hand also improves. Not all outs are created equal. However, sometimes, the board texture or opponent's possible hands can compromise your outs. For example, if the board is coordinated or features a flush or straight draw, some of your overcard outs may lose to a completed draw. In other cases, your opponent may hold the same overcard, reducing your outs further. Disciplined continuation decisions require you to assess not just the raw number of outs but their quality. If your only improvement path is to hit an overcard that may not be good, your real equity is lower than the simple count suggests. The value of overcards also changes as the board develops. On a dry, unconnected flop, 2 high cards remain valuable, but as more cards are dealt, the number of unknowns shrinks and the likelihood of improvement must be recalculated. If you miss the turn, your chance to improve on the river alone is just the number of outs divided by the remaining unseen cards. If you have a backdoor flush draw as well, your chance to make the flush by the river is low, about 4% if you need to go runner-runner, but it is not 0. Every piece of potential counts when making a decision to continue or fold. Overcards are not simply hands that failed to connect. They are hands with real quantifiable equity. Recognizing this helps you avoid premature folds and encourages a patient, statistical mindset. You are not relying on hope, but on the mathematics of outs and equity, and this discipline forms the foundation for more advanced decision-making. When you make a pair with one of your whole cards that matches the highest card on the board, you move into a new category of hand strength. Top pair is a significant upgrade from overcards, but its value is not absolute. The strength of your kicker, the other whole card, plays a central role in determining your equity against opponent holdings. Top pair with a high kicker is a strong hand in most heads-up situations, but as the kicker drops in rank, the risk of being outkicked increases. Consider the case where the flop comes King of Clubs, 7 of Diamonds, and 3 of Spades. You hold King of Diamonds and Queen of Diamonds. If you do not improve, you still possess a hand that can beat any opponent holding a king with a lower kicker, or any hand not containing a king. The critical detail is that your queen kicker gives you an advantage over hands like King Jack or King 10, but leaves you vulnerable to King Ace or King King. Domination and reverse domination are concepts that arise naturally from kicker dynamics. When your top pair is accompanied by a higher kicker than your opponent's likely holdings, you dominate their top pair hands. This means that if the money goes in, you are likely to win a large percentage of the time. Conversely, if your kicker is lower, you are reverse dominated, and you risk losing a sizable pot when both you and your opponent make top pair. The difference in equity between top pair top kicker and top pair weak kicker can be dramatic, sometimes shifting your win probability by 20% or more. When deciding whether to value bet or control the pot, the strength of your kicker should guide you. With top pair and a strong kicker, betting for value is often correct. as you are ahead of many possible hands that will call. With a weak kicker, caution is warranted. Pot control, keeping the pot smaller by checking or calling rather than betting or raising, reduces your exposure when you are likely to be outkicked. These decisions are not driven by fear or hope, but by a clear understanding of your equity in the hand. Emotional missteps with top pair are common. Players often become attached to the idea that top pair is always good, leading them to overcommit with marginal kickers. Others play too timidly, missing value with top pair top kicker, out of fear of being beaten. Ground your decisions in equity, not emotion. The kicker is not a minor detail. It is a major factor in hand value, and should always be weighed carefully when choosing your line. Hands that sit between clear favorites and obvious folds are known as marginal hands. These holdings often possess just enough equity to make the decision to continue a close call. Marginal hands include weak pairs, hands with a few outs to improve, and situations where your equity is thin, but not negligible. The key to navigating these spots is understanding the concept of pot odds. Pot odds compare the size of the bet you must call to the total size of the pot after you call. For example, if the pot is 90 chips and you must call 30 to see the next card, the final pot will be 120 chips. Your call represents 1/4 of the final pot, so you need at least 25% equity to break even on the call. If your hand will win or tie more than 1 out of 4 times, the call is profitable in the long run. If not, folding is the better choice. Take a hand where you hold 9 of diamonds and 8 of diamonds on a flop of 9 of clubs, 6 of diamonds and 2 of spades. There are 47 unknown cards and 3 remaining 9s that can improve your hand to 3 of a kind. The chance of hitting a 9 on the turn is 3 out of 47, which is just over 6%. The probability that neither the turn nor river brings a 9 is about 87%. In these spots, the decision to continue depends on the size of the bet relative to the pot and your chance to improve. When your equity is close to the required threshold, patience and discipline are vital. Folding marginal hands when your equity does not justify a call is not a sign of weakness, but of long-term thinking. The results of any single hand are less important than making correct decisions repeatedly over many hands. Sometimes, thin value can be pursued when the numbers are just right, but chasing every small edge can lead to costly mistakes. Trust the math and let go of hands that do not meet the threshold. Not every percentage of equity you calculate will be fully realized in play. Especially when you are out of position or facing aggression, the ability to see all future cards and reach showdown can be compromised. Equity realization is the process by which theoretical equity translates into actual winnings. When you are first to act, your opponent can make moves that deny you the chance to see your outs, such as betting big enough to force you to fold before the river. Position is a powerful factor in realizing equity. When you act last, you have more control over whether you get to see the next card, and you can make more informed decisions based on your opponent's actions. When you act first, you are often forced to make difficult choices without full information. This means that even if you have enough theoretical equity to justify a call, you may not realize all of it in practice if you cannot reach showdown, or if your opponent's bets price you out on later streets. For example, if you face a bet of 40 chips into a 60-chip pot, the final pot after calling is 140 chips. Your call requires 28.5% equity to break even. However, if you are out of position and likely to face another bet on the next street, you may not see both cards needed to realize your equity. It is important to use conservative assumptions in these situations, especially when you cannot control the betting. Equity is not just a number you calculate once and forget. It is a practical tool that depends on context, position, and the flow of the hand. Theoretical percentages guide your decisions, but understanding how often you actually realize that equity is just as important. Over time, the discipline to respect these nuances builds a solid strategic foundation. Let your thoughts settle here for a moment. You have moved from the certainty of made hands and draws into the subtler space where each card, each bet, and each decision carries weight. Margins matter, and so does patience. The quiet strength in small edges is what shapes long-term success. Allow the numbers to guide you, and let the calm awareness of equity bring clarity to your next hand. Chapter 4: Multiway pots and shared equity. When more players remain in the hand, the structure of every decision shifts. Each additional opponent divides the total equity available, meaning that the chance of any single hand winning the pot drops quickly as the number of players grows. In a game like Texas Hold'em, this change is not just a matter of more cards in play, but of the way your best hands and draws interact with a wider field of possible holdings. For example, when you are dealt Ace of Hearts and King of Hearts before the flop, there are 50 unknown cards left in the deck. If you are facing two other players and all three sets of whole cards are known, the number of truly unknown cards on the flop is 46. Add a fourth player, and the count falls to 44. This shrinking pool of unseen cards means every hand is more likely to face competition from a wider set of possible hands, and your own equity thins out as a result. It can be tempting to think that a strong starting hand will hold up, but this is often an illusion in a multi-way pot. Consider a hand like Ace of Hearts and King of Hearts. Heads up, this hand often enjoys a substantial equity advantage. But as more players enter, the portion of the pot that your hand can expect to win shrinks. Even if you start with a favorite, the combined chance that one of your opponents will catch up or already be ahead increases quickly. The same logic applies to the flop and turn. As each card is revealed, the number of unknowns drops, and the odds that someone has connected with the board grow. Drawing hands behave differently in this environment. When several players see the flop, hands that rely on improvement, such as flush draws or straight draws, are more likely to be up against opponents with similar or better draws. Yet the pot itself is often larger, since more players have contributed chips. This increases the potential reward, but also the risk. The value of a hand like a flush draw comes not just from the chance of making your hand, but from the size of the pot you can win when you do. On the flop, if you hold Ace of Hearts and King of Hearts and the board is 2 of Hearts, 7 of Hearts, Queen of Clubs, there are still 9 hearts left in the deck. With 47 unseen cards, your chance to make a flush on the next card is about 19%. If you do not make it on the turn, you still have 9 outs and now 46 unseen cards, so your chance for the river is again about 19%. The important shift in multi-way pots is not only about your own draw, but also about the likelihood that someone else is drawing to the same suit or straight. When more players are in the pot, the odds that your flush draw is dominated by a higher flush draw increase. This is a subtle but critical risk. Winning a big pot with a strong flush can be rewarding, but losing a large pot to a higher flush is punishing. As a result, the discipline to fold non-knot draws becomes even more important. Pot odds may look attractive, but you must account for the real chance that your best possible outcome is not the best possible hand. Multi-way pots also change the expected value of made hands. Strong holdings such as sets, 2-pair, or overpairs retain more of their equity than hands like top pair or bottom pair. The reason is that these stronger hands are less likely to be outdrawn or already behind, even when several players are involved. For example, the probability of making 2-pair in 7-card Texas Hold'em is about 23%, while the probability of making a flush, excluding straight flushes, is about 3%. These are rare, but when you have them against multiple opponents, their relative strength is greater. On a flop of 2 of clubs, 7 of diamonds, Jack of hearts, if you hold Ace of spades and Jack of clubs, there are 3 aces and 2 jacks left in the deck that could improve your hand further. Still, against several opponents, top pair alone is fragile. Overpairs require particular caution. While having a pair higher than the board is often strong heads up, in a multi-way pot, the chance that someone has flopped 2 pair, a set, or a strong draw is much higher. Board texture becomes a key guide. If the flop is coordinated, meaning the cards are connected or suited, the risk of being outdrawn or already beaten rises. In these cases, pressing an advantage with big bets or slow playing can backfire. It is safer to proceed with measured bets and be ready to fold if faced with heavy resistance, especially when the board is wet. Dry boards with little potential for straight or flush draws are less dangerous, but even then, multiple opponents can surprise you. Slow playing is especially risky in multi-way situations. The more players remain, the more likely it is that someone will catch up or already hold a hidden strong hand. Waiting to raise until a later street can cost you value and open the door to losing to a hidden draw. It is often better to bet for value early, charging draws and weaker hands, rather than giving free cards. This approach is not about fear, but about grounding your decisions in probability and the realities of shared equity. Exact equity calculations in multi-way pots are rarely practical during live play. The number of unknown cards, possible holdings, and potential outcomes grows rapidly as more players stay in. Instead of chasing perfect numbers, it is more effective to use simple heuristics and conservative estimates. For example, if the pot is $100 and a single opponent bets $20, calling requires about 14% equity to break even. If the pot is $60 and the bet is $30, you need 25% equity. In larger pots, such as $90 with a $60 bet, the break-even point rises to almost 29%. These numbers give you a mental shortcut for evaluating calls, even when you do not know all the variables. When facing unknown ranges in a multi-way pot, it is wise to assume your equity is lower than it would be heads up. This mindset helps you avoid overcommitting with marginal hands. Repetition and experience will reinforce these instincts more than any complex calculation. Over time, you will learn to recognize common patterns, such as when a draw is likely to be good, or when a made hand is vulnerable. Building this intuition is more valuable than trying to solve for exact percentages every time you face a decision. The best way to become comfortable with multi-way pots is to play through them and reflect on the outcomes. Notice when your strong hands hold up and when they do not. Observe how often draws complete and whether they are the best possible hand when they do. This process of trial and observation will gradually replace overconfidence with practical caution. As you encounter more multi-way situations, you will start to make more accurate and confident decisions, grounded in the realities of shared equity. As you settle into this new way of thinking, let your focus rest. Imagine the flow of chips across the felt, the quiet tension as each card is revealed, and the subtle dance of possibilities that each new player brings. Breathe in the patience required to wait for the right moment. Give yourself permission to fold when your hand is not strong enough, and to press when the odds are in your favor. Let the pace of the game guide you, slow and steady, as you become more attuned to the rhythms of multi-way play. Allow your mind to drift for a moment. Picture the felt, the gentle sound of shuffled cards, the steady pulse of the table. Let your thoughts linger on the lessons you have gathered, feeling the weight of each decision and the calm that comes from understanding. In this space, you can trust your growing intuition. knowing that each hand is a chance to refine your craft. As the night deepens, let your body relax, knowing you are prepared for whatever the next hand may bring. Chapter 5: Implied Odds and Future Value. When a player considers calling a bet with a drawing hand, the decision structure shifts from a simple calculation based on the current pot to a broader estimation of possible future winnings. This shift introduces a layer of judgment that goes beyond the immediate numbers on the table. Instead of looking only at the chips currently in the pot, a thoughtful player starts to picture the potential for more chips to be added on later streets if the draw completes. The essence of this process is called implied odds. Implied odds capture the extra value a player expects to win after making a draw, beyond what is already in the pot. To see the difference between immediate and potential value, imagine a situation where the pot holds 20 chips and an opponent bets 10 chips on the turn. If you call, the pot will become 40 chips, but you must risk 10 to see the river. Pot odds compare your 10-chip call to the total pot of 30 chips before your call, which means you are risking 10 to win 20. If you are drawing to a flush with 9 outs and only one card to come, your chance of hitting the flush is about 19%. This is lower than the roughly 25% equity required to break even on the call using pot odds alone. In this case, a call would not be profitable if you could only win what is already in the pot. Implied odds step in by asking, how much more can I win if my draw completes? If you believe that making your flush will cause your opponent to call or even raise on the river, there is extra value available beyond the current pot. The real question becomes whether that additional value is likely to be enough to justify the call. This is not about hoping for the best possible outcome, but about making a realistic estimate based on your opponent's tendencies and the situation at the table. For example, if your opponent often folds to river bets, you cannot count on winning much more when your hand improves. On the other hand, if your opponent likes to call with second-best hands, you may be able to extract enough extra chips to make your call worthwhile. It is important to anchor these expectations in what is likely, not just what is possible. Overestimating implied odds is a common mistake, especially for players who are eager to chase draws. The temptation is to imagine that every time a draw comes in, the opponent will pay off the maximum, but in reality, opponents fold, slow down, or sometimes have the same draw. A careful player grounds their estimation in past experience and the observable habits of their opponents. Implied odds are not a license to call with every draw, but a tool to find those rare situations where future value is genuinely available. The amount of money behind both players, known as stack depth, changes the landscape of implied odds in a fundamental way. When stacks are deep, the potential for future bets is high, and implied odds can be significant. With deep stacks, even a hand that is not profitable to call based on pot odds alone may become attractive because there is much more money that could enter the pot if the right card falls. This is why strong drawing hands, such as flush or open-ended straight draws, are often played more aggressively or speculatively when both players have a large amount of chips behind. Take a situation in a cash game where both players begin the turn with 200 chips in their stacks. The pot is 20 chips, and one player bets 10. After a call, the pot grows to 40, but there are still 180 chips left in each stack. This means that, if the right card arrives on the river, the entire remaining stack could theoretically be wagered and won. The possibility of winning a much larger amount than the immediate pot is what gives implied odds their power in deep stack situations. Contrast this with a table where both players have only 20 chips left behind before the turn bet. After a 10-chip bet and call, the remaining effective stacks are just 10 chips each. Now the maximum extra money that can go in on the river is 10 chips from each player. The potential for implied odds is almost gone, because there is simply not enough left to win. In these shallow stack scenarios, the decision reverts to the immediate pot odds, and speculative calls become much less attractive. A good rule of thumb is that implied odds start to lose meaning when the effective stacks are less than about 10 times the bet size. In those cases, there just is not enough room for future bets to justify calls that are not already profitable through pot odds. The table conditions, how many chips are in play, how much is left to bet, and how much can be won, are the foundation for evaluating implied odds. Careful observation of stack sizes and bet sizes is essential to making good decisions about whether to chase a draw. While implied odds can add value to drawing hands, there is a hidden danger that comes from the risk of losing more chips when your draw completes but is not the best possible hand. This risk is called reverse implied odds. When a player makes a strong but not unbeatable hand, such as a non-nut flush or a straight when a higher straight is possible, there is a real possibility that the hand is second best and will cost even more chips on the river. Consider a player who calls a 10-chip bet into a 30-chip pot on the turn, holding a draw that could make a flush but not the highest possible flush. If the river brings the suit they need, they may feel confident and call another bet, putting in another 10 chips. However, if an opponent holds a higher flush, the player has now invested 20 chips after the turn, only to lose them both. Reverse implied odds measure this cost, the extra chips lost when a draw comes in, but is dominated. This risk is especially high, with hands like weak flushes, or low straights on coordinated boards. The presence of higher possible flushes or straights in the deck is a warning sign. When the draw completes, it may look strong, but the true value is reduced by the possibility of running into a better hand. In these spots, the effective equity of the draw is lower than it appears, because the cost of losing extra chips when behind must be subtracted from the potential winnings. The concept of nut potential becomes critical in these situations. Nut potential means that when your draw hits, you have the best possible hand and cannot be beaten by any higher combination. When evaluating whether to continue with a draw, a conservative mindset pays off. If the draw does not have nut potential, or if the risk of running into a stronger hand is high, folding is often the best option, even when the draw looks tempting. This discipline helps avoid the costly mistakes that reverse implied odds can create. In real hands, players must blend the immediate value offered by pot odds with the potential future value described by implied odds. The process begins with a simple check. Does the call make sense based on pot odds alone? If not, the next step is to ask whether enough additional chips can be won on later streets to make up the difference. This is not a precise calculation, but a mental habit of weighing the likelihood of future bets being paid off. Suppose you face a 10-chip bet into a 20-chip pot on the turn, with 9 outs and 1 card to come. Pot odds alone require about 25% equity, but your draw only provides about 19%. With 200 chips left in each stack, there is the possibility that a large river bet could be paid if your hand comes in, making the call potentially profitable. However, with just 20 chips left behind, the extra value is capped and the call remains unprofitable. These decisions are never certain, and the best players err on the side of caution when future winnings are not guaranteed. It is easy to imagine that every draw will be paid off, but in reality, much depends on the opponent's willingness to call, the texture of the board, and the action leading up to the decision. By thinking in terms of long-term profitability rather than the outcome of a single hand, a player develops the habit of making disciplined, profitable choices over time. As you move forward, this approach to combining immediate and future value will become a foundation for deeper strategic thinking. The next step is to connect these ideas to the way hands are framed before the flop, setting the stage for a more complete understanding of equity and value throughout the hand. Allow yourself to settle into this mindset, feeling the table slow down as you weigh, Not just the chips in the pot, but the silent possibilities waiting in the stacks behind. Let your thoughts drift quietly, knowing that careful judgment and patient observation will guide you toward better decisions, hand after hand. Chapter 6: Preflop Equity Benchmarks. Every player should know. When a player holds a pocket pair and faces two higher cards before the flop, the structure of decision-making shifts from certainty to probability. This scenario is often called a coin flip, but the reality is more nuanced. A small pair, such as sevens, is not guaranteed to be a favorite against two big cards, such as ace and king. Instead, it is close to even money, with a slight edge or deficit, depending on the suits and specific ranks involved. The pair has 3 outs to improve to a set, but its main strength is that it already forms a made hand, while the overcards rely on pairing up. In a deck of 52 cards, there are 6 possible combinations for any specific pocket pair. Once a player has a pocket pair, only 3 more cards of that rank remain in the deck. This means the likelihood of improving to 3 of a kind is limited, and the pocket pair's advantage is simply that it starts ahead, not that it is overwhelmingly strong. As the rank of the pocket pair increases, the equity against overcards improves. For example, tens will perform better against ace and king than sevens will, because tens block more of the cards that can beat them. However, even high pairs are not immune to being outdrawn. The difference between a low pair and a high pair is meaningful, but not absolute. It is important to recognize that while all pairs share some similarities, their relative strength is shaped by the ranks involved and the suits in play. This understanding helps anchor your expectations and prevents overconfidence in situations that might feel more secure than they truly are. The classic coin flip language comes from the fact that many pocket pairs against 2 overcards are close to 50-50 outcomes. However, it is rare for the equity to be exactly even. The presence of suits, blockers, and the remaining cards in the deck will always shift the numbers slightly. What matters most is internalizing that a small pair does not crush big cards, and big cards are not certain to win. Each pairing of hand types creates its own subtle balance, and the knowledge of this balance supports calm, rational decision-making. Having this mental anchor allows you to approach pre-flop confrontations with less anxiety. When you see a small pocket pair facing a raise from a player likely holding big cards, you know the outcome is a close contest, not a disaster or a lock. This perspective frees you from the pressure of perfection and lets you focus on playing your position and stack size, rather than searching for guarantees. As your familiarity with these benchmarks grows, your confidence in navigating these common situations will deepen. When 2 high card hands face off against lower unsuited cards, the decision tree shifts to focus on domination and kicker strength. Hands such as ace-king or ace-queen hold a clear advantage over hands like king-jack or queen-10. This is because the higher cards not only have more ways to make top pair, but also tend to win when both players pair the shared card. For example, ace-king versus ace-jack means that if an ace comes, the player with king kicker wins, while the player with jack kicker is left with a weaker top pair. This concept of domination is central to understanding why big cards can be so powerful against smaller cards. The impact of suits in these matchups is present, but secondary. Suitedness gives hands a small bump in equity by unlocking the potential for flushes, but the main driver of strength is always rank and kicker. There are 16 total combinations of any specific offsuit non-pair hand, such as ace of hearts, king of diamonds, and 4 combinations of any specific suited hand, such as ace of hearts, king of hearts. After one player holds a specific suited hand, there are 11 remaining cards of that suit in the deck. This means that while flushes are possible, they are not the expectation. The value of big cards remains rooted in how often they make the best pair with the best kicker. Playing big cards well requires patience and discipline. It is easy to overvalue hands such as King, Queen, or Ace 10 when facing aggression, but their true strength lies in how they match up against the likely range of opponent holdings. When you face lower cards, your kicker advantage becomes crucial. Recognizing this helps you avoid costly mistakes, such as calling large bets with a dominated hand. The most valuable insight is that big cards are not all created equal, and their power comes from their ability to win when both hands connect with the board. By holding these benchmarks in mind, you can approach pre-flop play with clarity. You do not need to memorize exact numbers or worry about every possible combination. Instead, you can trust that big cards with strong kickers are favored against lower cards, and that suitedness is a gentle bonus, not a game changer. This perspective keeps your thinking calm and focused on the right factors. Speculative hands, such as suited connectors, introduce a different pattern of decision-making. Their equity before the flop is moderate, but their true value emerges from their ability to win large pots when the right board develops. Hands like 7-6 suited or 9-8 suited have 4 possible suit combinations in a deck of 52 cards. These hands do not start with the best hand, most of the time, but they have many ways to improve. When they make straights, flushes, or 2-pair, they often do so in situations where their opponent's hand is strong enough to pay them off. The typical equity of suited connectors against big cards or pairs is not overwhelming. In many common matchups, they will be behind before the flop. However, their strength lies in implied odds. This means that when suited connectors hit a big hand, they can win a large pot relative to their initial investment. This is especially true in deep stack scenarios, where there is enough money behind to make chasing draws worthwhile. If the stacks are deep, speculative hands gain value because the potential reward justifies the risk. When stacks become shallow, the story changes. Suited connectors lose much of their appeal in situations where there is not enough money left to win after the flop. Without the ability to extract large bets from opponents, the risk of playing speculative hands outweighs the reward. The number of outs and the likelihood of connecting with the board remain the same, but the practical value of those outs is diminished. Recognizing this helps you avoid playing speculative hands in situations where their upside is limited. Disciplined hand selection is the key to making the most of suited connectors. Understanding that their profitability is not about raw pre-flop equity, but about the potential to win big pots, shifts your focus to situations where your investment can pay off. When you see a suited connector, you are not hoping to win a small pot most of the time. Instead, you are waiting for those rare moments when your hand connects in a way that is well hidden and well rewarded. Building a practical mental library of pre-flop equity anchors can help you make confident decisions without getting lost in calculations. You do not need to remember every percentage, but certain numbers serve as useful guideposts. For example, if you hold 4 outs with 1 card to come, your chance of improving is about 8.5%. If you have 8 outs, you are looking at roughly 17%. These anchors give you a sense of what is possible without overcomplicating your thinking. Another helpful anchor is the break-even point for a call. If you must call 1 unit into a pot that will be 3 after your call, you need about 1/3 equity to break even. This means that unless you expect to win at least 1 time out of 3, the call is not profitable in the long run. These benchmarks are not rigid rules, but they provide a framework for making quick, rational decisions when the action heats up. Internalizing these anchors is about recognition, not perfection. The goal is not to memorize every possible matchup, but to gain comfort with the most common scenarios. Pairs against overcards, big cards against small cards, and speculative hands against strong ranges all fit into patterns that repeat at every table. The more familiar you become with these patterns, the less pressure you will feel in the moment, your focus can stay on reading the situation and responding with discipline. Allow yourself to settle into these reference points. Let the numbers become a gentle rhythm in the background of your thinking. When you see a pocket pair, remember that it is rarely a lock against two big cards. When you hold big cards, remember the power of domination and kicker strength. When you consider suited connectors, let their value rest on potential, not certainty. These anchors will serve you well as you move forward, bringing calm and clarity to every pre-flop decision. Let your mind rest on these benchmarks, and trust that each hand you play will build on this foundation. Chapter 7. Turning Poker Math into Intuition. Most real decisions at the table are shaped by your comfort with the underlying math, not by your ability to recite statistics from memory. The architecture of poker rewards players who repeatedly experience the same situations and allow the numbers to become second nature. When you first learn that the chance of being dealt any pocket pair pre-flop is about 6%, or that flopping a set with a pocket pair happens roughly 1 time out of every 8.5, these facts may feel stiff and distant. Over time, though, seeing these events play out again and again in real hands gives you a sense of rhythm that goes beyond memorization. The sheer number of combinations in Texas Hold'em, over 1,300 distinct two-card starting hands, reminds us that no one can perfectly memorize every scenario. Instead, the mind learns through exposure, by watching hands unfold and quietly absorbing the patterns. There is no need to chase perfection or fear small mistakes. Even the most seasoned players make errors, sometimes miscounting outs or misjudging a percentage under pressure. The key is not to punish yourself for these moments. Growth comes from reviewing hands after play, noticing what felt natural and what did not, and gently correcting course. Flashcards and drills have their place, but true comfort emerges when you see, for example, that the odds of flopping a set are not just a number, but a lived experience. You have seen it happen, you have missed it, and you have learned to expect it at the right frequency. The anxiety of not knowing every number by heart fades when you realize that intuition is built on a foundation of repeated, real-world encounters. It is easy to believe that some players are simply born with a knack for poker math, but intuition is never innate. It is earned through observation, reflection, and steady play. When you focus on the process, watching, reviewing, and recalculating as you go, the numbers begin to settle into your thinking. The goal is not to recall the precise probability of a pocket pair in every moment, but to feel comfortable with the general landscape of the game. Over time, you will find that comfort and calm matter more than the ability to recite every percentage. Progress is measured not by the number of facts you can repeat, but by the ease you feel as you make decisions. The journey is not about memorization, but about letting the math become a quiet companion at the table. Familiarity with odds and frequencies reshapes the way you see hands as they develop, allowing you to spot situations and act with confidence. With practice, you will begin to recognize the outlines of recurring events without having to consciously calculate every time. For example, when you hold a flush draw, you will sense that the chance of hitting your hand on the next card is about 19%, because you have seen this outcome unfold many times before. The specific numbers fade into the background, replaced by a quick recognition of patterns, bet sizes, board textures, and the rhythm of action. As you gain experience, your ability to identify hand strengths and draw types accelerates. You will notice how quickly you can spot a 9-out flush draw, or distinguish a 4-out gut shot straight draw. The initial hesitation you may have felt when counting outs or estimating equity begins to disappear. Your mind learns to sort through the noise, focusing only on the information that matters in the moment. This fluency is not the result of cramming or rote study, but of steady exposure and reflection. Each hand you play or review adds another layer of understanding, until the process feels almost automatic. Steady, deliberate decision-making becomes more natural as your pattern recognition improves. Under pressure, it becomes easier to slow your thinking, breathe, and trust the process. Rather than rushing to recall every number, you settle into a calm presence, knowing that your intuition is anchored in real experience. This sense of calm is both the product of pattern recognition and the environment in which it thrives. When you trust your instincts, you make decisions with clarity, even in the heat of the moment. The table becomes less intimidating, and your actions are guided by a quiet confidence. The foundation of all these instincts is the math you have learned and practiced. Every time you recognize a familiar bet size or draw, you are leaning on a structure built from careful study and repetition. There is no need to force the process. Patterns emerge when you allow yourself to observe, reflect, and play without fear of making mistakes. With time, you will find that your instincts are reliable, grounded in the math, and ready to guide you through new situations as they appear. The psychological landscape of poker can challenge even the most disciplined players, especially when the numbers do not seem to align with the outcomes you experience. Both overconfidence and underconfidence can cloud judgment. When you believe that you have mastered the odds, it is easy to overlook subtle differences in board texture or misapply a probability. Conversely, doubting your understanding can cause hesitation and second-guessing, even when your math is solid. The real danger lies in letting either extreme dictate your decisions, rather than trusting the process you have built. Variance is an ever-present force in poker, and it can distort your perception of the math. For example, you may know that with a gut-shot straight draw, where you have 4 outs, the chance of hitting on the next card is about 8%. Yet after missing several draws in a row, frustration can creep in, making it feel as though the odds are stacked against you personally. This emotional misinterpretation leads to doubt, even though the probability remains unchanged for every new hand. The discipline to accept variance and stick to your process is essential for long-term success. Short-term results can tempt you to abandon sound decision-making. A run of bad luck may cause you to question your approach, while a streak of fortunate outcomes can breed complacency. The healthiest mindset is one rooted in process, not in the outcome of any single hand or session. Reviewing your decisions, rather than your results, is the surest way to maintain composure and continue growing as a player. Emotional stability comes from knowing that your choices are mathematically grounded, regardless of the cards that fall. Every player faces periods of doubt, but patience and discipline are the antidotes. Mastery is not a finish line to be crossed, but a path to be walked. Each hand is an opportunity to practice, to observe, and to refine your approach. By remaining steady and trusting your understanding of the math, you weather the inevitable swings and emerge stronger. The numbers you have learned become a source of comfort, helping you stay balanced and focused through the ups and downs of the game. The bedrock of your progress so far is the collection of poker math fundamentals that will serve you for years to come. These odds and concepts are not just facts to memorize, but tools to use in every session. It is valuable to review and practice from time to time, but there is no need to complicate your thinking with excessive detail. Simple comfort with the main probabilities and patterns is enough to make strong decisions. The real goal is to feel at ease, trusting that your instincts are shaped by the work you have done. Even if you do not remember every percentage exactly, you are equipped to navigate the game with confidence. The knowledge you carry is not fragile or fleeting. It is built to last, growing deeper with every hand you play. Trust that you are ready to bring your understanding to the table. Allow yourself to play with calm assurance, knowing that the math is part of you now. Let each decision be shaped by the quiet certainty that comes from experience. There is no rush, no pressure to be perfect, only the steady satisfaction of applying what you know, learning as you go, and enjoying the process. The cards will fall as they may, but your foundation is solid. You can breathe, relax, and let your intuition guide you, one hand at a time.